for people here in Northeast Mississippi, anybody who has seen the news this week about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, obviously there are probably some folks who maybe were on the fence before that announcement. Now they may be hesitant. What's your advice to somebody here in our area to try to get them on the other side of the fence and to take one of the other vaccines?
Okay, so I think it's important that they get the facts, which is always good to make sure that we're clear about it. Let's take the J&J vaccine, a very effective vaccine in which there were a number, now 6 adverse events that seem to be associated with the vaccine itself. I think the people of Mississippi need to appreciate that this is an exceedingly rare event, is literally less than 1 per million people, which is quite extraordinary. This has nothing at all to do with the other 2 vaccines, the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine. Let me tell you about those 2 vaccines. There have been now about 123 million people who received at least 1 and sometimes 2 doses of the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. 122 million people, and there's no adverse events of any significance associated with that. So although this J&J vaccine was put on pause, I think the people of Mississippi should realize that the system that follows this for safety is such a strict system that safety trumps everything else. So when even you see a suspicion of there being an issue, they call a pause on it, which they did. But the pause was on something that was extraordinarily rare and that has nothing at all to do with any of the other vaccines. So if I were not in my position and I was looking at it from the outside, I would say the bottom line is that those people are paying a lot of attention to safety. So when they say something is safe, you better believe them because they're really paying a lot of attention to it. And I can tell you for sure, the other vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, are very safe and highly efficacious, and they're life-saving. That's the critical issue. I mean, the chance, particularly of people who are elderly or who have an underlying condition, the chance of their getting into really serious trouble if they got infected is pretty high. So you want to get vaccinated not only to protect yourself, but to protect your family and to protect the whole community of Eastern Mississippi. Because if you get vaccinated, you don't let that virus go through you to somebody else, even if you don't get sick. So it's really part of helping out your own community.
I know Pfizer's been talking about wanting to extend the eligibility for its vaccine to people as young as 12. You okay with that?
Absolutely, because the clinical trial that was done on adolescents was 100% effective. There were 18 incidences of COVID-19 in the placebo group and 0 in the vaccine group.
What about the variants? Can these vaccines that are going to people here in the Magnolia State, can they stay ahead? I know we're seeing more instances of the UK variants. I know we've got, I think maybe 1 or 2 of the South African, and just by the nature of, the virus is going to try to split off even more.
Yeah. Well, what you just said is an excellent reason why you should get vaccinated if you're in Mississippi. A, the vaccines are highly protective against the British variant, no doubt about that. And even the South African variant, it is less protective against getting infected, but it is very effective against preventing disease that causes hospitalization and disease that leads to death.
I want to just give you some examples and get your advice for somebody who may be watching this. Let's say a young woman, not pregnant, but one day would like to have children. And the last thing that she wants is to put something in her body that might down the road affect a pregnancy or affect a newborn. What do you say to her to convince her to get this vaccine?
Okay, let's, as always, you look at the data. So since the emergency use authorization were given to Pfizer and to Moderna, there have been over 70,000 women who elected to get vaccinated while they were pregnant. And the reason they decided is that if you get infected with SARS-CoV-2 and you get COVID-19, there is a significant difference in the sense of you have a risk of a bad outcome of your pregnancy, as well as premature birth, as well as stillborn. So the one thing you don't want to do if you're pregnant, you don't want to get infected with SARS-CoV-2 and get COVID-19. And for that reason, so many women who were pregnant decided to get vaccinated. And the CDC is following very carefully people who were vaccinated while they were pregnant. And they have now something like 700 or 800 births of women who were vaccinated during pregnancy. And there is no alarming red flag signals about anything that people need to worry about. So my advice to pregnant women would be go ahead and get vaccinated, because the risk of getting into trouble for you and your baby from getting COVID-19 is certainly much, much greater than any risk of the vaccine.
Let's talk about young men, and I know our time's running short. Mississippi is generally, according to our state health officer, has had a history of young adults in general not getting vaccines. We have a history of young people not getting the flu vaccine regularly. I'm a young man. I understand why senior citizens, why people older are getting the vaccine, but I'm in good shape. Why shouldn't I be among the 20% versus the 80% that we need or thereabouts to get to herd immunity? Why should I be the one to take that leap of faith when I could be that 20% and I don't need the vaccine?
Well, okay, there's a couple of reasons for that. What you need to do is to come and make rounds in a hospital with me and see that there are young people who can get seriously ill, not nearly as likely as an elderly person, but you're not exempt from getting seriously ill from SARS-CoV-2. And even if you get a mild illness, there is a syndrome called long COVID, or COVID that you clear the virus, but you still feel badly for weeks and weeks and months. So that's one reason. The second reason is that you should have what's called a societal responsibility. Let me explain. So let's say you get infected and you're a young guy and you're healthy. You get infected, but you don't get any symptoms. You may inadvertently and innocently pass it on to somebody else that then passes it on to somebody's mother or father that are on chemotherapy for cancer, or to a person who's immunodepressed. And then you wind up being part of the propagation of the outbreak as opposed to part of the solution. So you have a responsibility to yourself, but you also have the responsibility to protect the people around you. Because even though you don't get symptoms because you're young and healthy, you're still allowing the virus to jump from you to somebody else. And you don't want that hanging over you, that you may be the person that as innocently and inadvertently infected someone else and made them very sick. You don't want that.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, thank you so much for your time.
Good to be with you. Thank you for having me.